Arnold, thank you very much for joining today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Harris is campaigning in New Hampshire today. She's telling voters that if she's elected, she'll propose a $50,000 tax cut for new small businesses. Now, what kind of impact would this policy have for business owners, and would it create more jobs and lower prices?
So I've been very critical of Kamala Harris's tax policies in the past. The desire to raise the corporate tax rate, for instance, I think is really bad policy. But on this, she seems to be tacking more toward the center. And I do think this tax deduction, this expanded tax deduction, would help small businesses, would help startups. So I think this is a move to the middle here that probably does resonate well with American voters here who do want to see more small businesses and more vibrancy in our small business community, more startups, more companies coming online. This certainly helps by providing a deduction to smaller businesses that are just getting off the
gate. Is there any downside to this policy? Obviously, it would encourage more people to start new businesses, but is there a problem with too many people doing so?
No, I don't think there's a real problem as long as they're not gaming the system and taking advantage of it. It does come with a hefty price tag. I've seen it priced out early estimates, even though we don't have much in the way of policy details, but it could cost tens of billions of dollars. Obviously, we have a $35 trillion or so national debt. So when you do make proposals like this to lower taxes, I think the fiscally responsible thing to do is to provide ways to pay for it, ideally in the form of reducing other programs, unnecessary spending in the federal government. I doubt she'll do this because this is a presidential campaign and she doesn't want to make those tough choices. But it would be nice to see some more fiscal responsibility and a movement toward a more balanced federal budget.
Now, Trump-era tax cuts are coming to an end next year. They lowered the corporate rate and individual taxes across the board. What were the impacts of this policy now that we've seen it play out?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act back in 2017 provided a huge boost for the economy, lowering the corporate rate from 35% down to 21%. We've seen almost the phenomenon of corporate inversions where companies would move their headquarters or certain operations overseas. That's basically disappeared, and we've seen more corporate activity here as well as small business activity here. We talk about Kamala Harris's small business tax plan here, which, again, I think does have a lot of merit attached to it. Well, I think Trump's was actually a little bit better because it created a 20% deduction for small businesses for pass-through entities that pay taxes on the individual schedule rather than on the corporate schedule. It also lowered those corporate rates. Kamala needs to embrace some of these components here. I know she doesn't want to do anything that is remotely close to what Trump did, but when it comes to cutting taxes for small businesses, that ought to be a bipartisan endeavor. And I think those proposals, some of which are going to expire, those small business provisions will expire in their entirety at the end of 2025. It'd be nice to see some leadership from both the left and the right on making sure our small business community is vibrant and can compete not just with larger companies domestically, but also overseas as we do business on a global basis.
Brandon Arnold, Executive Vice President at the National Taxpayers Union, thank you very much for your insight here today.
Thanks for having me.
And how officials are trying to shore up cybersecurity. As the U.S. pushes for another ceasefire deal in Israel's war against Hamas, Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, doubles down on securing the Philadelphia corridor. Why is this strip of land so important for Israel's survival? We'll talk to a panel of experts on countering extremism and law enforcement for insight. That and more when we return.
Purpose. Do I have a death wish? Morgan asked. Maybe I did. I thought this would be our final run ever. We had made millions and millions of dollars. But God had other plans.
Peter Lowe, the one-time drug dealer turned pastor, along with two others, will be executed at 12 midnight local time.
The next line about Jesus.
You can be in heaven, or you can be in hell. The choice is yours.
We're gonna walk straight out of here. Pretend to be the media.
This pathetic individuals while trying to seize dozens of internet domains. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has the story.
The government of Russia continued to use RT to direct disinformation and propaganda. multiple U.S. departments on Wednesday alleging that Russia is meddling in this year's presidential elections. The Department of Justice indicted 2 editors-in-chief for the Russian state-owned media outlet, RT.
RT and its employees, including the defendants, implemented a nearly $10 million scheme to fund and direct a Tennessee-based company to publish and disseminate content deemed favorable to the Russian government.
The department alleges that the 2 individuals violated the Foreign Agents Registration Act. In return for the money, the Tennessee company allegedly created English content, which it then posted on Instagram, YouTube, X, and other platforms. The Treasury Department also sanctioned the 2 editors, plus 9 others, over the alleged meddling in the elections. RT responded with ridicule, saying 3 things are certain in life: death, taxes, and RT's interference in the U.S. elections. And separately from the actions against RT, the FBI and the Justice Department are also seeking court permission to seize 32 websites, so-called cyber squatter domains.
These websites were designed to appear to American readers as if they were major U.S. news sites like the Washington Post or Fox News. But in fact, they were fake sites.
The DOJ published examples of such sites. For example, this one, which appears to be a Washington Post article stating Middle East coalition of U.S. allies crumbles like a house of cards. Or another fake article reading, "No more money, Kremlin will solve Ukraine's problem." The FBI is now working to take these sites down. The 2 indicted editors for RT remain at large. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Turning now to Israel's war against Hamas. To discuss the latest developments, we have Blaise Mishtel, Vice President for Policy at the Jewish Institute for National Security of America, and Rich Giardino, Sheriff of Fulton County, New York, and host of The Rich Giardino Show. Blaise Mishtel, Rich Giardino, thank you very much for joining us here today. Now, the U.S. has charged Hamas leaders with terrorism, citing the October 7th massacre. Why now, and is it enough? I'll give you guys both a chance to respond to this, but let's start with Blaise.
Yeah, well, I think this is a direct result of what we saw unfold this weekend when Israel brought home the bodies of 6 hostages that had been executed in cold blood by Hamas just hours before the IDF found them, seemingly precisely to ensure that they wouldn't return alive. And one of those hostages was an American citizen. In fact, he was the 43rd American citizen killed by Hamas since October 7th. And I think finally the United States government is realizing that it needs to put some pressure on Hamas. It needs to turn the screws on Hamas to force them to stop this war and return the hostages. And these indictments are perhaps the first step in that. Although I should note that indicting 3 dead Hamas leaders really isn't going to do a whole lot to convince Hamas to stop taking hostages.
Mm-hmm. And Rich, do you think this is enough?
I agree. I think it's a symbolic thing. I think it's symbolic, and I question it because it's an election year, and an indictment of this nature means nothing to these people. They deal in death. They want destruction of Israel. They want destruction of the Jewish people and the Jewish state. And simply charging them or indicting them in the United States isn't going to make a difference. These people don't care. Frankly, that's how I feel. This is a religious war that's been going on for hundreds of years. So I agree with Blaise to an extent. I think it's symbolic and a starting point, but I think it has little meat to back it up. Especially, we're gonna arrest you because we indicted you. Yeah, we're out here killing innocent Jewish people, children, and hostages, and we indicted them. Great.
Now, Blaise, the U.S. is moving forward on what's being called a take-it-or-leave-it ceasefire deal. Where do you see this going?
I see it going in the same direction that each of the previous take-it-or-leave-it ceasefire deals have gone, which is absolutely nowhere. Hamas feels like it holds all the cards. It has hostages, still 95 hostages, and it's seeing increasing world pressure on Israel to try to stop this war. Just yesterday, we saw the United Kingdom say that it was going to suspend the sale of some arms to Israel. And as long as Hamas thinks that the world is turning against Israel, as long as it hears that the United States is putting pressure on Israel, not on Hamas, to stop this war, it thinks it's winning. And so why would it take a deal instead of keeping on fighting and seeing Israel get ever further alienated from the rest of the world?
One of the sticking points of a potential ceasefire deal is the border along Gaza and Egypt. Blaze, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is standing his ground on keeping troops along that Philadelphia corridor. Can you explain the importance of this region to Israel, its security as a nation, and the future of this region?
Sure. So, I think there's three goals in this war that the government of Israel has talked about. Obviously, to return the hostages, to destroy Hamas, but also to ensure that October 7th can never happen again, that a terrorist group in Gaza could ever attack Israel in the way that Hamas did on that tragic day. And one of the reasons that Hamas was able to stage that attack is because they get weapons, money, supplies, fighters, all coming into Gaza largely through overland and particularly underground tunnels between Gaza and Egypt, through which they smuggle all these goods and weapons. Israel has found over 150 tunnels connecting Gaza to Egypt, and those are the lifeblood of Hamas. And so the Philadelphia corridor is a small strip of land that runs along that southern border of Gaza, under which the tunnels have been built, and ensuring that Hamas is cut off from Egypt, ensuring that weapons can't be smuggled into Gaza again, is really fundamental to the future security of Israel, to making sure that Gaza doesn't threaten Israel again. And so for the Israelis, making sure that they have control, making sure that they can destroy those tunnels and make sure that no more tunnels are built is really fundamental to achieving their war aims.
Now, Rich, pro-Palestinian protests have resumed on Columbia University and other college campuses like Cornell and Michigan, although not to the extent we saw last spring. If these protests escalate, how could universities respond?
First of all, I think that it's disgusting the way they responded to date. They have to keep the individuals who are antagonists, who are sent in to be disruptors. There's a big difference between your freedom of speech, threatening Jewish individuals, students who are there, also destroying property. And there has to be an immediate consequence, and there is none. They've arrested a few people. We have to separate those who are peaceful protesters, have a right to protest, even if it's an unpopular view, and those who are violating the law by causing riots, by damaging property, and also by threatening students who are Jewish ancestry. This is terrible, and I agree with Blaze about the border between the countries. Prime Minister Netanyahu is right. They have to have control of that to defend their country. The stated mission of Hamas is to kill and eliminate the Jewish country and the Jewish state. That's their mission, and they've made no bones about it. And we in the United States, our government has dropped the ball. There's light between the president and the vice president. There's light between Congress and official policy of the White House. These things have to be cleared up, and there has to be a stand with Israel pledge, because Israel didn't start the war on October 7th.
Blaze Mitchell, Rich Giardino, thank you very much for joining here today.
Thank you for having us.